Yes, if you take a look at the time, it is indeed Biden time. Welcome to Biden time as always. I am Christian Bladt, joined by, pointing the wrong way, Scott Moore. Hello, sir.
Hey, it's good to
And
be here.
back with us again today is our pal Al Gragg, Al of OccupyBlack.com, of course. Al, thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. What's up, Christian? What's up, Scott? Good to be here.
So, shout out to our pal Tamara, who would have been with us today, but nasty stomach bug has just knocked her out. So hopefully she's feeling better soon. So, Ukrainian President Zelensky addressed Congress today, and I only know that because Marco Rubio sent a tweet of him, watching him speak, because that's apparently what he's there to do, is just selfies of him, speaking with Zelensky, mostly a joke, and he spoke very eloquently, and I think that just a very disturbing video that he showed, but you know what, a video that needed to be disturbing because what's happening over there is disturbing. And he invoked Martin Luther King. He said that every day there is a 9/11 happening there, and I think that it's important that you make this plea, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, sort of in terms of action, but President Biden has since then announced an additional $800 million in military aid for the Ukraine, and is reading about some interesting weaponry that they might send over there. What do you think, Al? Let's just start off big picture, what it must be like for Zelensky, who is there hanging on a lot longer than I think anybody expected, especially Vladimir Putin. And just, the fact that now, unfortunately, every day you're seeing videos of civilians just being gunned down by Russian soldiers, because that's sort of like what happens when you get desperate, is, all rules of engagement are out the window. So just big picture, sort of your thoughts on what's happening there, and what it must mean for someone like Zelensky to have to, really ask for time with Congress this morning.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Zelensky. I like the way he's conducted himself, just previously into the onset of the invasion. Obviously got a lot on his shoulders. Regular cat, right? He's a comedian, right? I think we've all seen like the viral videos of him dance around like the Beyonce or whatever.
Yeah, let me just jump in. He was like on a sitcom where he accidentally became president. So it's it's like if the Trump story was a little funnier, where
exactly.
Anyway, finish your thought, Al.
Yeah, I was just saying, intelligent dude. I respect him. I wouldn't, who would want to trade places with him? He's got a lot on his shoulder, and while the U.S. will not be able to do everything that Zelensky is requesting, when it comes to politically and our own, self-preservation, self-interest, whatever you call it in politics at home. If I was him, I'd be asking for everything he's asking, pulling all the stops, not just humanitarian aid, not just weapons, all that stuff I agree with, but then it obviously gets a little bit more dicey than a no-fly zone. But yeah, I wouldn't trade places with him in a minute. He's in a tough position. I think he's doing a good job.
Yeah, I mean, Scott, considering the circumstances there, and the fact that, he is still alive is that in and of itself. The fact that Putin became so focused, we talked a couple weeks ago that they basically, whatever the evil incarnation of like the A-team would be, they called in like a hit squad to really take him out, and he's still there talking to Congress. Give us your thoughts about, it can be about the content of what he said, but just sort of the fact that we're now almost really 3 weeks into this, and it's still going again, which is not what Russia, or at least Putin, expected. Just give me your assessment of where we're at right now in terms of Zelensky making this plea really to American lawmakers.
Yeah, I think, again, he was kind of the right leader at the right time. There's been some comparisons, rightfully or wrongfully so, to Abraham Lincoln, to Winston Churchill, to leaders that did not have a lot of experience prior to being thrust into roles and into a wartime, president or wartime leader. And he's been that person. He did not have a lot of experience, right? And he came in, and he was able to utilize, which is important for a leader, especially today in the era of TV and digital and everything, to be able to communicate with your fellow citizens, to be able to communicate with the world. And so a lot of times, being able to have that acting background, or at least that good, comfortable communication style, really can help you in times like this. And he's also shown to be, a strong leader in the sense where he's not backing down, where he's not acting afraid. Like you said, there were a lot of reports of him trying to be taken out by Russian, but the fact of the matter is he stayed strong. He stayed there, and he gave a very a very meaningful speech today, because it's true, they are definitely suffering at a level like a 9/11 every single day, more so when you think about how they're just being constantly bombarded by the Russians, and they do need the help. They need the help and the support, because they are smaller than the Russian troops, and at some point they're going to be ground down, and that's the whole point. Putin's going to continue to grind them down until they can't really keep going anymore, and trying to grind down the spirit of the people to the point to where they're going to feel that it's a lost cause. So that's why he really is trying to keep his country inspired and the world inspired, and he's getting a lot of support, but he needs more, to be honest. And it's not something that we can necessarily do, to Al's point, and to the degree that he might feel that we need it, but at least there is more that we can do.
Sure. Yeah. I think that it makes sense for him to, ask for whatever it is exactly that he needs, and hope that, even if we can't meet him halfway, we're able to, meet some of that. Now, obviously, as this has gone on, hundreds of thousands and millions of Ukrainians have fled from Ukraine for understandable reasons. And Al, I know one of the reasons that you reached out to me about coming on, and we always enjoy having you on, but what certain Ukrainians or people who are foreign nationals in Ukraine are running into at some of the borders. Now, the one that I specifically heard about was Poland, but I think even since you and I talked, I've heard that at a number of these borders, some of these countries, they're okay with the idea of white Ukrainians coming in, but there are reports, and again, the story that I read was specifically Poland, specifically quoting soldiers on that border saying no blacks. And so I wanted to obviously let you talk a little bit about this part of the story, which is getting some attention, but it is not the I think the most focus of the refugee stories right now is this.
Right. And again, to state for the record, everyone here, it's good to know, like, we speak freely, we're out in the open, we don't endorse by no means Russia invading a sovereign country. The Ukrainians have our sympathy, and I'm actually,
of course, yeah,
all we can do to back them, whatever humanitarian aid we can, maybe, some weapons, but and I don't predispose, and I don't paint all Ukrainians with the broad brush, nor do I paint the Polish guards at the border. But from what I understand, and I wish I would have pulled that too, there's more nuance to the stories, because it's not just Polish guards, but also Ukrainian guards ushering the white Ukrainian citizens up forward, to cross over, and keeping the Black African immigrants and other immigrants in the back. And by no means do I paint all Ukrainians as racist. I think it's just one of those things which leads to a bigger discussion that racism exists in all countries. This is a predominantly white European country, and there's, to the extent that we have, I don't know, like the Tea Party, or the types that we would call, who stormed the Capitol on on like January 6th, those types waving like the Confederate flag. They have their faction of of racists and neo-Nazis who kind of work in concert with the state to a limited degree. They're tolerated, but by no means do I think that applies to the massive Ukrainian people, or much less to Zelensky.
Yeah, but all it takes is having one person with a racist outlook at the front of those lines, and obviously a lot of people were waiting for days to cross into some of these borders, but then you heard firsthand reports that it was really white Ukrainians who were waiting less time, still waiting for a while, but actually being let through. And, and then the other side of this is that just the reporting. I believe you also wrote to me about this, Al, and we would show clips if I didn't always worry about, YouTube. When you play other things, all of a sudden it gets very territorial. But just the way that this conflict was covered early on, you had people saying like, this isn't something you'd expect to see in Eastern Europe. And there would even be, and these weren't all American reports, these were reports from around the world, but and some of them were American. They would say things like, this isn't something you expect in what the, reading between the lines was from civilized white nations. This is like, they're trying to say that this isn't some third world country in Africa, as though, and you can certainly point to examples of things like this, that happen in the African continent. But the idea that it's like, well, this isn't usually a white problem. It's like people are noticing for the first time. It's like, so no one paid attention to what was happening in Syria.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that narrative. So that's like, we talk about people trying to cross the border, and you've got a couple of, all it takes is, anyway, is a few racist soldiers on either side. But then this is people who are in the media and they're covering this and editorializing in a way that I don't know, seems really harmful,
Yeah, and well, I'd like to, and I forget the name of the ethnic identity of the reporter who used the term. He's, this usually doesn't happen to, white civilized, people. I don't know if he was Ukrainian, whatever he was, but it's a narrative that pops up even in the U.S. And I was citing that instance of, while if it's more trendy, it's more acceptable to support, the Ukrainian immigrants. You see all these white, blonde, refugees being bombed, and they have our sympathies. But for instance, Gigi Hadid, top model, who happens to be Palestinian, her and her sister, she tweeted, or no, she posted on her IG, I support, help and aid support and liberation, for the Ukrainian people, just like I do for the Palestinians. And of course, it got edited. It got Vogue struck down the Palestinian part. And you see that a lot where American publications, even the ones who are supposed to be liberal, will not give the same validity to refugees or those in other countries who are engaged, with other bigger European countries. And we know Israel is it's a Jewish state, but their ethnic identity, if we're going to parse words, they're white. And we look at these sympathy for Palestinians, but you can even take it, it's not given the same weight, but you can take it to anything else. When the U.S. invaded Libya, Kuwait, Iraq, any other ethnic country, these it wasn't given this kind of a weight, priority, and sincerity within the media. It wasn't cool. And again, it goes back to that narrative. If you're a black or brown country, you're not seeing as sympathetic. You're used to it because it's all those brown people in those uncivilized countries. So again, I don't paint everyone with a broad brush, but it's an existing narrative. We see all the time, and we see it today, even on MSNBC.
Right. And, Scott, what this brings to mind is something that our pal Chelsea Galicia would talk a lot about, is when you deal with the problem in terms of, immigration at our southern border, is look at the reason why people are leaving, not just Mexico, but, they're leaving those countries south of Mexico. What are the circumstances there? And the story here is usually, well, there's all these people that are coming across the border, and we don't want to take them. So, well, why are they coming here? Why are they giving up everything to come here? Is it, what part of that narrative is it? What do you think, Scott, just generally speaking, sort of that part of the narrative, but also this idea that in some way Ukraine and Russia is is surprising, for people to actually say that on broadcast, that it's surprising because like, look at all these white people fighting is basically what, that's not a direct quote, but that's essentially what I have heard, and there's a clip that has gone around a lot that has a number of highlights like that. So give me
It
your
captured what was unspoken,
Right.
What people don't normally speak. They said the quiet part aloud.
Right. That's a great, yeah, exactly. It's like, no, that's the part that's supposed to stay in your head, not the out loud part. But give me your thoughts on really any part of that, Scott.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, we've talked about this ad nauseum through the years about, not only just the reasons why, and there's more reasons, especially when you're talking about Central American migration and everyone coming up to the US, about our involvement over the past 40 years plus down there and how we've made the situation worse. But also, again, like, regardless, people don't want to have to leave their homes. People don't want to have to uproot and leave everything behind. And come somewhere new and start from scratch. That's not what people want to do. So the fact that they're doing that means that it's that desperate that they're willing to uproot their entire lives, everything they've known, and leave that behind. And in some cases, when you migrate to other places and you're there, you can't go home again because you're not a legal resident of the new country. And the minute that you leave, you won't be able to come back. So, these people are giving up everything, their entire safety and everything to make this move. And then on top of that, they can't even go home to see family and loved ones. And you hear these horrible stories through the years about how they've left home and they've been gone for 20, 30 years. And, they've missed parents as they've aged and passed away, and missed funerals and missed celebrations. So the fact that people don't seem to talk about enough is the fact that if you're making this type of move, it is out of a point of desperation where you feel you cannot do any better. It's not safe for you to be where you're at, and you have to make that risk everything to cross the border. So it's not something that people do willingly if they don't have to. So that's something that people tend to forget, and we've talked about this before. And yes, I can't remember where I saw it at, but it was one of those things that they had brought up about how it was a white person's war with Ukraine and Russia, and how they appear to be white, but essentially, the point is that, like you were saying earlier, that the folks that appeared to be white were able to pass through the border a lot easier than those that didn't. And here we are at this day and age, and we still have that. And like you said, it is interesting that people are now kind of bringing that up and saying it out loud as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that to Al's point, the reassuring thing is that when people say that they stand with Ukraine, and some people are making the distinction, I stand with the people of Ukraine, they are not saying I stand with the white people of Ukraine. That is not the prevailing message, but it's important to shine a light on these instances, and hopefully it at least calls attention in some way. That people who are looking for safety in another country are able to find it. I referenced sort of in passing, sort of the feeling of desperation from Putin, and there was a very specific series of there's this headline in particular from the Daily Mail: Putin's chilling warning to the West, but also to the oligarchs. The ranting president tells, quote, scum traitors Russians will spit them out like a midge that flew into their mouths, and says Western attempt to have global dominance is coming to an end. And I think that narrative is kind of the last grasp that he can have, Scott, is to be like, no, the West is trying to stop us. You have to stick with that idea of we're helping the Ukrainians. The early comments that were denazifying them. What is your, obviously you are not in that room, and if you were in that room, you'd be a good like 20 feet away from Putin at a table, which seems to be the only way that he sits right now. It's like the breakfast scene in Citizen Kane. No one sits anywhere near Putin. What are your feelings for the comments that we're getting out of him, and how those really mesh with what soldiers are saying? That really they didn't realize, that some of them didn't even realize they were going to be going off to fight a war. Others really didn't understand what was going on. So give me your thoughts, Scott, on what where Putin's at right now, and if he still has the grip on his country that he did even a month ago.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, this is a man at a point of desperation. He's lashing out, like we've talked about. He thought he would be able to come in and just cakewalk into Ukraine and take over in a matter of days, if not, a week or so. But the fact that this has been grinding on for weeks and weeks and has definitely taken effect on the troops. Like you said, I don't think they had a longer term strategy because they just assumed they were going to come in and take over. And now they haven't. They don't have a good long-term strategy for these troops to be able to go in. And there's been issues with getting food to them. There's been food shortages, fuel shortages, supply shortages for these troops. And again, they're up against a group of Ukrainian, like, just everyday citizens that are willing to fight back and not just let them come into the country. So there's some bewilderment with the Russian troops on exactly what's going on. I think a lot of them, again, didn't feel that they need to go in and do this war, so they're a little bit thrown for a loop too. You don't have good organization or structure when you just assume you're going to come in, so there's no great structure there, especially when you have something like Putin, who's a dictator for all intents and purposes. You have one person that everybody's reporting to. It definitely leads to some disorganization. He's definitely at a point where he feels backed in a corner, so of course he's going to lash out. And as a longer term strategy, I do believe that the propaganda machine with the media in Russia, it's slowly starting to ebb away, and I do think that over time you're starting to see the support for this definitely go down, because now everyday Russians, as we talked about, are being affected by this. When you start seeing everything shut down around you, regardless of what you might hear or see in the Russian media, when you start having to see that your everyday stuff is affected, you might start thinking, okay, maybe this is not the best idea, even though, again, it's the 21st century. It's not like it was during World War II or something where you could really shut down media and nobody can really get a good outside look of what's going on in the world. We're all interconnected with social media. Even when things are being shut down, people are going to find a way to find out what's really going on out there. And regardless, when they start to feel that their everyday things are being affected, when they can't do what they were used to doing, going to McDonald's, for instance, going to Starbucks, having money that they can just take out easily out of their bank accounts, those like everyday things are going to start affecting everyday, well, they already are, but affecting everyday Russian citizens to the point that a lot of them are going to be like, what are we doing now? Even if they did somehow agree or fell into the propaganda that this was a right war to go into and invade a sovereign nation. So yeah, it's definitely affecting, and I think that's going to be affecting his grip on power, especially even with his oligarchs and the other very wealthy cohorts that are surrounding him. Same thing, where they're affected personally. It's going to start being a lot that they're all going to eventually, at some point, want to get out of this war or figure out a way out of these sanctions. And so, if he keeps this going, it's going to be a losing strategy for him and for the Russian people.
Yeah, a couple things about what you said. When there were first the economic sanctions, the first thing that we started to see was, that next morning, people couldn't take the subway because their credit cards and things didn't work. So everybody had to use cash. So when you have that sort of immediate real world inconvenience or, just hardship, really, more than an inconvenience, I think you start to realize, like, wait, why did this happen? Wait, what are we doing? I thought that this was just a military action. And also, to your point about the oligarchs, I mean, when he loses when the oligarchs are not on his side anymore, it's basically all over for him, because that's when you're telling millionaires and billionaires that they're actually not millionaires or billionaires anymore, and if they weren't on board with this to begin with, I think that it's a matter of time. And Al, in terms of on this, there was a video that you sent to me from someone named Johnny Harris that I had a chance to look at some of. But again, it goes into the issue of sharing other YouTube shows. But it's sort of this idea of this belief why Putin is beyond the point where he can possibly win. Talk a little bit, I guess, about just your personal thoughts about what there's left for him, and is it possible to save face if you're Vladimir Putin, or you're just already too far in?
Yeah, I mean,
possibly.
see that, and that's always the rub when you're dealing with a dictator. And I don't think, not saying you guys do this, but there's sections within the media, Putin's just this wild-eyed psychopath. No, he's a dictator who wants
Yeah.
to conquer. He's very sober and he's very sane. And while he has a huge ego, those are the guys you don't want to put in a corner, which we already seen that he's put in a corner now. Because while we'd like for him to fold and we'd prefer, I agree that the oligarchs are the linchpin because they're the ones holding this money. While we'd like him to fold, and I think there's good signs. Like I even saw just before we got on, I think China is actually stepping in, trying to mediate and bring on a ceasefire. I don't know how legitimate that is, but that was something they didn't say before. But I guess I'm saying the blowback is when somebody is like Putin is put into a corner, almost like a Saddam Hussein. Where does that leave us to go? Because we've already ratcheted sanctions up to here. I believe there's one more tier of banks, maybe one or two or two more banks that that we can freeze his money internationally, that we can boycott and perhaps ratchet up our supplies, humanitarian, and weapons via Poland. But once you've maxed out, how far can you ratchet up? Where do you go? Like the way, and again, I understand why he's doing it because he wants all the help we get. But guess what? The U.S. is pretty much at 80% reached as far as we can go at sanctions. We can go a little bit more, but what happens if we go one more notch up and Putin's like, okay, yeah, you went up one more. Now what are you going to do? We can't do anything else after that is can be an empty threat. And we got to remember too the temperature of things. Like if you guys follow the what is it called? The nuclear clock, the atomic clock, we've already moved, like 1 inch forward. So I think there's need for some kind of while we're all anti-war and we support the Ukrainian people, I think there's need for some sober assessment of how far we can go, because it's not just affecting us at gas prices, but and the crypto market as well as the financial markets. The next thing is we're going to see shortages everywhere else in the United States. So then we have to make a sober decision of how much is our behavior in ratcheting things up affecting us here. And then the discussion is, well, could that money, if we're really talking about, oppression and immigrants over there and refugees, then we're really talking about, what's going on over here and then creating, bigger problems over here. So I think that's a sober discussion to have, because just personally, I just don't think there's that much farther we can go, or just strategically, I think we'd be painting ourselves in a corner.
Yeah, Scott, to that point, the sanctions have been in place for a while, and while people have been inconvenienced, it hasn't led to just the entire, in the complete crumbling of the Russian way of life. It hasn't led to people taking to the streets and, looking to overthrow the government. So they've kind of weathered it, and yes, it will continue to be hard, and it can be a slow burn, but it does seem as though, yeah, like Al's saying, you could do a little more, but you've already done a lot, and they've kind of gotten through this point. So where do you think is left at this moment for the United States to go realistically, not able to, check off the list of not really demands, but the request from Zelensky? You're not willing to do a lot of those things. So what do you think is left at this point
without more
for us
blowback?
to do?
Yeah.
Right, exactly. What do you think, Scott?
Well, no, I mean and here's the thing: Russia is a huge country. So like you said, to your point, they can weather it for a long time. We can look at other countries that have managed to get by, smaller, of course, with sanctions, like North Korea, for instance. And you look at Cuba with our own embargo that's been going on for 60 plus years. It's not quite as deep as the sanctions. And you look at Venezuela, look at other countries that we've done some level of sanctions or embargoes to. And has that changed anything with the government? No. Yes, it is a slow burn. The sanctions that we put on Russia have not just been us, but also been around the world, are a lot more intense and will definitely, like we said, it is affecting them every day. And the slow burn is, like you said, a lot of folks are going to first be like, okay, the West is evil. They're the ones that are doing this. This was our right to be able to go back and return Ukraine into the fold. That's what they wanted, or, the propaganda is that's what Ukraine wanted. So a lot of times it is going to start off with that fact, well, the West is the evil ones and they're trying to choke us and we're going to stay resilient. But the slow burn is that over time, as it does start to squeeze them from both sides, like we were saying earlier, when the oligarchs who know what's happening out there aren't able to do the things they're used to, be able to travel freely around the world and be able to, own soccer clubs in the UK and yachts in Italy, when that side starts to feel the pinch, and then the everyday citizens on the other end here start to feel the pinch to a point where it's past the breaking point on both sides, that's where you're going to see the biggest change. And without, like we said, going into making that ultimate thing of going into war, all we can continue to do is keep those sanctions going, hope for, like I was saying earlier, if China wants to play the mediator because they're kind of walking that tight rope on both sides, and be able to help maybe produce some kind of ceasefire. Otherwise, we provide more weapons. We've seen European leaders step up. They've actually come over to Kyiv and during the middle of all this shelling, and they're showing their support as well. And so if the EU continues to stand strong, the EU as a bloc is incredibly powerful, not just economically, but also militarily. They just have not been ramping up their military spending like they have in the past, but now they're increasing that. If you have that right there, that's going to be a bulwark to Putin in the longer term. But I don't see how he can continue doing this without having the support at home, and that's going to continue to go down over time as, like I said, both sides are affected.
Yeah, and there was Al. You had a reference to China earlier, and it's always you always have to keep an eye on them. This was something that I saw. Actually, it's the wrong headline. My apologies, but I saw that we, as in the United States, was basically we've sent 3,000 troops to Australia just because there are concerns that that China's real support at this moment is we could probably settle that whole Taiwan thing right now. I mean, that's not that different than it, and we do have to keep an eye on that. And obviously, when you move 3,000 troops, that can be seen as a provocation, but it is a reminder that we definitely have to pay attention to some other, I don't know, let's not call them enemies, let's not go that far, but some hostile relationships that we have out there. And so, yeah, I mean, it's we've got, the US told European allies that Russia asked China for combat drones. And what you said earlier is that I think China is content to let Russia handle this for themselves, but that doesn't mean that they're not focused on sort of their own ambitions, and that this might be a great time while the world is distracted. What do you think about what could potentially be going on in China, really at any point?
Yeah, I think that's exactly where China would play it. Meanwhile, hey, we're gonna, slow down the Russians over here. And meanwhile, we're going to stack up and, prepare for our invasion of Taiwan. God forbid. They look at it the same way Russia is at the Ukraine. And that's what I mean about unintended consequences, when you ratchet these things up. And it's besides the fact that the UN, not just the UN, the US, we know the UN is a majority of American troops. We're also sending US troops and advisors to Poland. So our American boys are already on the outskirts of this thing, and we're increasingly sending our American boys. So I don't think that it's without the geopolitical impact, like you said, with China, but also, for instance, and like I alluded to, not just gas prices. I was alive in the 70s. I remember like the gas lines. We're talking about shortages. Shortages, not that you just didn't, not just with gas, but like you've seen in all other shortfalls, in shipping, like we saw with COVID. So these are things that that potentially get worse, and it probably will get worse, if things stay on the same track. So it goes beyond us. Okay, well, Americans, it's just if you believe in freedom, what's the problem with the gas going up a nickel? We all believe in freedom, but there's some certain things, there's some, like we said, there's causal effects way more than a nickel of gas on our freedoms or our way of life that's going to suffer. And let me go back to the MLK thing, which I really kind of resent it when people invoke his name, because MLK was a pacifist. So to invoke his name, to cause and call for intervention, he would, of course he would have, love, support, prayer, humanitarian aid. But Zelensky, in the midst of his talk, asking for all this aid and weapons and a flyover, Martin Luther King stood for peace. And we are in need of peace right now. And America's, Martin Luther King invoked his name twice. I really kind of resented that, because Martin Luther King, when he died, he was for us getting out of Vietnam. He wasn't for us intervening in any other war, even with they may be called righteous wars, where other innocent people are being invaded, and that's a particular reason. It has nothing to do with peace. So it's that slippery slope. I think we can all kind of acknowledge that the U.S., the more we ramp things up, the less it, we can legitimately say we're all about peace, then it turns to this geopolitical manipulation and escalation. And it can really kind of bothers me because, again, back to the MLK thing, people always invoke his name and co-opt his name for the wrong reasons, but never for war, even if you think it's a justified war. It really bothers me. And like, even when you said that, like I said, we can go to certain things again about the Ukraine, where, I think a lot of people would be, justified in saying, they are much like America, as far as their racial makeup. Racism exists. Oh, here's the other thing. Zelensky it's not like just where the neo-Nazis have this fringe wing like we do in America, where the neo-Nazis, they've infiltrated all these like far right groups, in addition to the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, but literally the police. We saw that on January 6th. These neo-Nazis and white supremacists has infiltrated U.S. police. We have police gangs these days running around South Central, like with these racist tattoos. So it's not only that the Ukraine has the same problems of America, but guess what? Zelensky, he didn't at least pretend to criminalize him like the U.S. pretends to. He acknowledges them. He accepts their help, and it came when Russia first invaded Crimea, and he made a bargain with the devil. When he wanted these help for these Ukrainian nationalists, and I think there's a number of reasons why people can say, again, we're for the Ukrainian people, but we're not necessarily for the rules, for the government. And it really bothers me when people invoke MLK's name, because there's a lot of things people could point out about, this whole Ukraine thing, where I think they'd be just in saying we wish them the best, but we have a lot of problems going on at home right now. We have our own immigrants, refugees from Skid Row to Crenshaw to the Appalachian Mountains. We've got a lot of our own problems with people who are dealing with economic ills, and they can't afford another, 10 cents on their gas. Just another thought.
No, yeah, and look, you use the term righteous war, and that sort of thing is applied, very subjectively by people participating in wars. I'm sure that Putin tells himself and his advisors that this in and of itself was a very righteous war. A couple of important things from Lewis Cox. One, if you haven't yet, please like this video, subscribe to this channel. Thank you, Lewis. And then to the earlier point, Scott, Russia, we invade Ukraine, yes. Meanwhile, China, now is a good time to maybe invade Taiwan, yes. What level of concern do you think there ought to be that Beijing has probably felt like there is never a better time than right now for us to, take what they consider as theirs, Taiwan?
Yeah, and I was just going to say with the MLK thing, I do find that fascinating. And it's not just MLK. I was just going to say, when people co-opt somebody's quotes and everything after they've died, and they try to just make this person larger than life, and that they kind of will fit into any kind of situation they're thinking of, not just war, but everything else. And you saw politicians on both sides of the aisle do it every year on MLK Day.
Yeah,
sure. And I do find it fascinating. And it is true. That was the schism that kind of broke the relationship with MLK and President Johnson with the Vietnam War when that happened. And they never really truly repaired that friendship before MLK was assassinated. So it is an interesting point that was brought up, and it does happen all the time.
Which was considered by certain circles to be a righteous war to prevent the spread of communism. So
but
it's
he definitely
very subjective. Yeah.
And that's what sort of this situation is, again, where people are looking at this present war as being democracy versus authoritarianism, and that's where we get into the China and Russia connection. And look, China's been looking at this every single day since it actually happened. They knew likely that it was occurring, as we've heard reports that they had asked Russia to wait until after the Winter Olympics to end before they did that.
I did read that.
So they've definitely been talking, and I know from what we've read that you would think that China was clearly looking at how the rest of the world has responded to Russia, and having to weigh it out to see, is it worth for them to go in and do an attack with Taiwan. Part of the issue is that they wouldn't want to, is the fact is, if they align themselves too much with Russia, they're basically aligning themselves with a junior partner, more or less. This is not a country that's equal to China economically. At one point, when the Soviet Union fell 30 years ago, they were pretty close economically. They're maybe 3 times difference or so in their economic strength. But now you're talking about China is 10 times plus bigger economically than Russia. So they would have to be pulling up Russia. And to them, this may not be the type of alignment they want to go into. Not to mention, they're dealing with their own economic issues between, COVID again affecting potential supply chain issues and the economy, as they've had to shut down, or they've decided to shut down portions of the country again, as their zero policy for having no COVID cases as the cases rise there. So if they're shutting down things economically, that's going to affect them. And then seeing how the sanctions have happened with Russia, they don't necessarily want to be in that same situation. And the fact of the matter is, you start to go in and attack Taiwan, you're just opening the door to have a really big, protracted war with other countries becoming involved, and it would be catastrophic for everybody. So I think for them, the best thing is to continue to put pressure and continue to try to have that influence on Taiwan. And then again, economically have that type of pressure. They've done this a lot with the US, and there's been a lot of discussion about that, on how we deal with our commerce, how we deal with, movies and culture and things that we export to China. Even when you talk about airlines, they've gotten all the airlines to not even put Taiwan on their maps when you travel over to Asia, and it just says China. So it's little things like that they can continue to exert their influence with other countries without having to go in and do something as dramatic as going in and invading Taiwan. But they can always kind of keep that on the back burner to keep people feeling like around the world that there is a chance that they could go in and exert their influence to say, yes, this is our rightful place, like Russia thought with Ukraine, and go in and invade Taiwan. And otherwise they're doing it slowly but surely with Hong Kong. They're slowly exerting their power there and being able to influence the government there. And those are the type of things they can continue to do without having a full-blown economic sanctions, or having a full-blown military operation, which would again potentially destroy their own economy and go into a protracted war, which would not be good to have these superpowers at war, meaning the West and China and the rest of the Asian theater. So they're looking at this, and they're probably feeling that it's not in their best interest to do this right now, and they don't want to have to support Russia as the junior partner here when they have their own issues to deal with right now as well.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that it's all worth sort of keeping an eye on what they do and where it goes. And obviously, the reach of China is such that we on a much lighter note, we saw that video of the wrestler turned actor John Cena having to apologize in Chinese for mentioning that Taiwan was a country. And I mean, it's funny to have to see that, but it's like, oh yeah, the movie studio was like, you have to do this. And there were, and so, I mean, it's, you try, you don't mess with China because of you want to talk about the impact on the economy.
Right.
Movies that haven't been able to open in China, COVID or not COVID, haven't had the kind of success that they wanted to. I want to,
and I would just quickly add too that I believe if the Russian invasion went quickly and they took over Ukraine pretty quickly, that might have redone the calculations for China to feel like, oh, maybe they could easily sneak in and do a quick attack too. I think their confidence level has probably gone down a bit. Not saying they couldn't steamroll over Taiwan if they wanted to, but seeing that the ground war with Ukraine has gone a lot slower for Russia, and it wasn't the
Yeah.
cakewalk that Russia thought, has probably recalculated China's thoughts
Yeah.
about doing the same thing, thinking, you know,
Yeah,
it would be a protracted war for them as well.
when you threaten people in their homes and they'll really dig in and they'll fight literally to the death, it does at least give you pause, even if you're China. Two more
Mhm.
things. I want to end on something that's a little bit of a lighter note, but something that I think is important to reference. You did send this to me, Al, and I feel like it was a comment that was well intentioned, but a lot of times the best intentions, of course, can go awry. So Jane Campion, who won, I think it was the Screen Actors Guild, or it
Or
was the
People's
Critics'
Choice.
Choice,
Let me double
People's
check.
Choice, yeah, for King Richard with Will Smith, speaking to Venus and Serena Williams. I think that, in the moment when you're accepting an award speech, I think we see why a lot of times people have it written out whether or not they're going to speak. I don't think she intended to get up there and create this kind of problem, but I think the reason it is important is because sometimes when you're not as well thought out, your mind might take you somewhere that it shouldn't. So just to take a moment and talk about why this is important to pay attention to. It's not just, an award speech where somebody forgot to thank, their mother or something, I mean, why this is a problem.
Right, Jane Campion, obviously super talented director, and when she got up there and she said, "Venus and Serena, accepting the award, you're marvels, you're great, great job for women, but you didn't have to battle these men, like I did." And again, I'm like, I try to be like you, Christian. I try to give people the benefit of the doubt. We all misspeak, myself included, but you know what it is? It's a consistent gaffe of white feminism. That white feminism, kind of like which ignores the black woman or the black feminist struggle, or consistently putting it ahead of theirs. And when we really think about it, with Venus and Serena, forget all that they've accomplished. They've had to battle so much stuff. The racism of not just the sports league and what's it called, the UTA, what's it called, the USTA, and all types of blowback, just from even when they're abroad in countries and in certain tournaments. So the fact that that they don't have to face men, they deal with facing racism and men every day, basically, by virtue of being a black woman. So it was a gaffe. I like to give, like you said, I like to give her the benefit of the doubt, but again, it fits into that whole, like, that white feminist thing where the black woman struggle isn't really as bad as the white woman struggle, kind of like the oppression Olympics thing, and when really, a very strong argument can be made, and that's kind of like what Angela Davis makes, former Black Panther. She's a feminist,
Right.
And socialist, proud feminist, but she makes the argument that when she talks about, well, feminism should be universal, obviously by virtue of a woman being white, nobody can help it. They're oppressed too, but they experience, just by virtue of being white, experiencing a level of privilege, that comes with simultaneously comes with them being women. So it kind of is what I think you guys get what I'm saying. That's
No, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think that there's a way to say, my struggle does not compare to yours, but I would like to call attention to the fact that there are not enough opportunities for women in film. It's not even the way I said it, but
Yeah.
you can make that point without trying to take anything away from what they have had to go through, and that's why I think because you should be able to speak off the cuff, off the top of your head, and not wade into something like this. And I think that that's why it's important. But again, I'm giving her the benefit of the doubt that it was just like, well, she did not mean to say it like that.
Yeah.
But and that's why. So what I do want to end on, and we haven't had the opportunity to really cover a lot of lighter stuff on this show because the world has not allowed it, but I was encouraged to see unanimous support in the Senate for something that I think most of us can agree with. And that is to put an end to, well, it's not really put an end to daylight savings time. It's going to put us on daylight savings time year round. So they're like, well, we're going to stop changing the clocks, which, look, if you have kids like I do, that right now, this one, the spring forward is okay. The fall back is a nightmare because you've got your kids waking up at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning because they wake up at the same time and they're like, I don't know what the clock is. I don't know what the difference is on that number. So and I think there's legitimate concerns from the farming industry. And there are anecdotal issues like I'd like my kids to not be walking to the bus stop when it's dark in the morning. It's not as safe. But coming to some kind of consensus, obviously, to see the way that I look at it, Scott, the Senate unanimously voting for anything, I'm like, well, this is something to get my attention. And something that seems to be really outdated and unpopular, like daylight saving time, which people are very quick to point out. If you call it daylight savings time, it is actually called daylight saving time. And I think I even already made the mistake. But talk a little bit about the Senate agreement and how this is the thing, support for Ukraine, no, voting rights, no, election reform, no, no. But, daylight saving. Okay, now you're talking. But look, let's take the positive that they agreed on something, right, Scott?
No, it's true. It's still pretty messy though. So the weird kind of quirks in the law are, because there are a few states like Arizona and Hawaii that just stay on standard time all year round.
And doesn't the Florida Panhandle is on a different time zone than the rest?
They're in the
of
central
Florida,
time
right?
zone. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because
the extreme
the
western.
way that it,
yes,
right.
Pensacola.
So it's like the way that
western.
it lays under the other. Okay, but anyway, sorry, go ahead.
But so the weird quirk in the law is that any state can say they want to stay on standard time all year round. They don't have to move their clocks forward. However, the opposite is not true. So if states decided, they wanted to do the opposite, they can't do that. And the federal law was trying to correct that. So they can't stay on daylight saving time all year right now at this moment because of the quirks in the federal law. So if, let's say, California and Florida, for instance, are two states that voted internally statewide to keep daylight saving time permanently. However, the quirk in the federal law,
I remember having that pass in California a while ago,
yes,
and it hasn't changed. Yeah.
No, well, because again, federally, you can't do it. That's what's weird about
I
the quirk.
see.
If we had voted to say we wanted to stay in standard time all year round, we could, because federally the law allows that to happen, but not the reverse. So that's why this came up. However, we've messed with the clocks before throughout the years, and all the way up to World War II. Then we went to daylight saving time permanently before our time in the 70s during the energy crisis. But after a couple of years, most again, like today, who felt like, oh yes, we wanted to be on daylight saving time permanently, realized that it wasn't necessarily that good, because case in point, like you said, in the winter, especially places like in the western Florida Panhandle before they move over to Central Time, the sun's going to rise well after 8 o'clock. You think about like Grand Rapids, Michigan, it's going to be after 9 a.m. in the winter.
Yeah.
There's going to be some of that kind of stuff where on the flip side, it's going to be very difficult in the morning. People going to work in the morning, people starting their day at work at 8 or 9 a.m. and it's still dark out. It is going to probably affect most people on the flip side. And then when you think globally, commerce wise, when you think about Europe, for instance, they go back to standard time during the winter. And so now you're going to have even a greater time difference between Europe. And so when you're starting to think that you're interconnected globally with certain places, it makes it more difficult to sync up when you're further apart too. So it sounds good on paper, and most people agree that we should not be doing the antiquated moving the clocks, because it's not the same as it was 50 years ago, where things are less dependent on sunshine and other things in daylight, when we can, we realize it's not making a big difference in our energy usage, and we're already a 24-hour type society anyways. There's been also talks that we should all just go to UTC, the universal time, and everyone should just be on that, but I find that very confusing too. So if it's
would that make all the, like, that would have not even the time zones,
right? It would be the whole, everybody would just be on the same time. And that would be kind of confusing too. But the thought is that it'd be around the world, because a lot of places already go by UTC to say, okay, this is what we're doing. And if the entire world was just based on that, which is over the Greenwich Mean Time, we'd all be on the same time. But again, that seems confusing on how you would do that when people are sleeping and waking and all that other stuff. But the point of the matter is we've futzed with the time in the past, and I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of it. It might sound good for a couple years, but we'll probably go back. But we've seen over the past couple years, we've whittled the time down for standard time, because it used to be October and April. And then in 2005, Congress had signed the extension then that George W. Bush signed to make it into November and March. So we've seen it now become, instead of split, it's more of an 8.
It's less time.
Yeah, it's 8 months and 4 months now. So we're going in that direction, but now they're just going to close that gap. But I don't think it'll be the last that we'll be dealing with it.
So, Al, you hear all this, and obviously with all the important things that are going on here and abroad, this is the only thing that you can get both parties to agree. I mean, unanimous. I mean, you know, there's usually you get one person that's like, yeah, I'm not into this. Unanimous anything, but of course it has to be something like daylight savings time, right? Saving time, right? I mean, this is the only time you can get agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and usually I'm more skeptical when both parties can agree on something like that. Is it something that's substantive?
Yeah. But, how's it going to screw us? The fact that they all want it. Yeah, no, it's a great point. Yeah, they all want it. You know,
but you guys are just real quick. You guys
and
Scott, you've waxed eloquently on it. Christian, this is more your thing. Plus, I'm a city boy. I know nothing about how this affects the farmers. But speaking of more frivolous things, I don't know, man. Before we check out, the Kanye drama and the Pete Davidson. I got to throw this out there too. Pete Davidson fired back. Team Skeet. Team Skeet. He fires back the text from Brad, a screenshot of, stop messing with your Kim. She's a great mom. Let's come over and talk. By the way, I'm in bed with your wife. A screenshot. I don't know, you guys.
What are you doing right now? I know that is a story that I don't think I ever thought we were going to get. You know, and it's look, stuff like that between two high profile, well, really 3 high profile celebrities. It is nice to have those as a distraction, because, you know, when your timeline is, look at this terrible video from Ukraine, you look at this, look at that. And then I'm like, oh wait, what are these screenshots that Kanye deleted? I want to know what that is. And I agree. And that's that's where we leave it on Skeet and Kanye. And so we'll see. But the House would have to also pass this any changes to daylight saving, and Biden would then have to before he can sign it, that would have to happen. And I don't know. I don't think you can get the House to pass much of anything the way it's constructed. And you know what? Maybe they should focus on more important things. But knowing our government, they're not focused on more important things. So you might as well try and pass things like having Skeet Davidson Day, become an unofficial holiday. Well, thank you both for this informative and at times it's always enjoyable talking to you both. Sometimes the subject matter is less so, but it's always great to have you both on. Al, let everybody know where they can find out more and keep in touch with you.
Hey, everybody, you can follow me on IG at Occupy_Black. That's my documentary, Occupy Black, or go directly to the website at occupyblack.com.
And Scott, I haven't seen you interacting with Mitch McConnell lately, but
I'll have to get back to it. I know when things get a little less crazy for me personally, but yes, you can find me on Twitter at sman80. That's sman80.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. Please subscribe to the Blackcast YouTube channel. You will get this show when we do it. We're on about every other week schedule right now. We'll see when things maybe settle down, maybe we'll be able to do that. But you can look for us in 2 weeks around this time. But follow me at ChristianDMZ. I'll always do my best to send out the link. And you can follow the show at Biden Time TV. But that is all the time we have for now. Thanks again to Scott and to Al and to everybody in the chat. And we